First of all, I want to thank For Our Children's Future for having us all out. We're going to all learn about Common Core tonight. First, let me introduce who we have here as the panelists. We have Nikki Baser from the ISPE. We've got Bruno Berhan from...
I'm from the Senior Fellow with the Heartland Institute.
And Aaron Rosh. We also, we're waiting for Jessica Handy with Stanford Children, and I'm going to introduce Representative Barb Wheeler to give us a legislative update first.
Thank you guys for coming. Just to give you a little bit of a bio on me, I'm representing District 64, which is Crystal Lake, all the way north and east into Antioch. Born and raised in Lake County, and moved into McHenry County about 15 years ago, and I'm a former teacher. I stopped teaching when I started having children, and now I have 5. So public education has always been important to me, and I'm happy to be here tonight. When I heard about Common Core, just within the last year, to be honest, and what it is, how it's going to affect our schools, our teachers' evaluations, our standards. Actually, it was Sherry Creighton who introduced me to it. I started to ask more questions. And I'm very excited about tonight. I'm anxious for Jessica Handy to get here as well, because it's a very, it's a national and federal program that's going to become a local program for our schools. So I thank you very much for coming here tonight and partaking in this, becoming informed, and hopefully sharing that information and that education with other people in your school districts as well, because it's extremely important. Because it's so big, and because there are so many questions, and so many questions that can't be answered. Representative Dwight Kay from Southern Illinois, wrote a resolution, House Resolution 543, who said, can we stop? Can we just push the pause button on Common Core and find out what exactly is Common Core, what effect will it have on our schools? Specifically, what's the financial effect on our schools? I'm brand new to Springfield, and because I'm a former teacher, they put me on the education committee. I was thrilled. But one thing I discovered is that there's 14 members on the committee, and one of the questions that was continually asked, they come with great programs. All the representatives come with great programs with bills, and they say, this is gonna solve child obesity if we have this in the schools. This is gonna solve all the ADD problems in the schools. This is gonna solve all the teacher evaluation problems in the schools. They're all wonderful, and I'm exaggerating, of course, but they're all wonderful programs. And many of us, especially the new representatives, say in committee, that's a great program. I hope it works. How are you going to pay for it? And many times they don't have an answer, but they talk on how they're going to pay for it. There are wonderful programs out here. There's great merits to these programs. But how does the state of Illinois pay for these programs? And that's an integral question for all committees in the state of Illinois to keep asking, because the state is broke. This particular resolution says, this may be a great program. These standards are phenomenal. The evaluations on teachers' changes may be fantastic. The testing, from being able to test students in the fall and testing them again in the spring, is a great idea. No one will disagree with that. But the question it all boils down to is, how are we going to pay for it? And it's a considerable amount of money the state doesn't have, and specifically local schools. 67% of the schools are underfunded according to the study. And I don't know how we're going to pay for it. And I hope, and we're going to talk a lot about the merits of Common Core or the lack thereof, but the question I think we should continually ask is, how are we going to pay for it? House Resolution 543 basically says, can we wait? Let's wait and see how much this is going to cost for Grays Lake, which, by the way, I taught in decades ago. How much is this going to cost for Grays Lake, for Antioch, for Fox Lake, for Lake Villa, for Crystal Lake? We really don't know. In its entirety, we really don't know. And so therefore, we don't know whether the investment is worth what it's going to cost. So that's why I signed on to this resolution. But there's a lot of great things that both sides will share about Common Core. And thank you again for being here. Please spread the word. It's a shame there's not more people here. I know they came very far to share this information. It would be a shame if it just sat here tonight. Let's continue to spread the word and ask more questions and get educated. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This is how it's going to work tonight. For the first hour or so, up until about 8 o'clock, I am going to ask a series of questions. They're all just basic questions about Common Core. And at that point, we're going to allow the audience to ask questions. I would rather have you ask questions than make statements, but to ask questions of the panelists so you can find more information out. But to start off with, we're going to have each of them give about a 2-minute introduction as to who they are and what they're here for today. So, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. I'm Nikki Baser. I'm the General Counsel for the Illinois State Board of Education. And I first just wanted to thank Representative Wheeler for inviting us and for having this forum. We do appreciate her presence on the Education Committee, and having teachers serve in that capacity is always a benefit to the state. I very much appreciate you all coming out. I know it's hard to come out midweek, and this is an extremely important topic, and it's great to see folks who are so dedicated to their communities and to their schools coming out. I will say that the Common Core I think is an incredibly exciting and wonderful development for the state of Illinois. And we're going to answer a lot of questions tonight, and I hope that you will come away with some good information about the Common Core. The one thing that I really want to start with is the goal of the Common Core is to really, as with all of the work that we do in Education Illinois, is to improve the outcomes for our children. We want to make sure that they are ready for whatever comes post-high school, if that's career, if that's training, if that's college, if that's community college or four-year. And the Common Core gets us moving in that direction. I also want to say that, I've looked through some of the materials tonight, and I hope that we can get to some of the real facts here. The really exciting thing about the Common Core was that it was actually a state initiative. It did not come from the federal government. It's not a national federal program. There was a meeting in around 2008 of the superintendents, the chief state school officers of all of the states, and Dr. Cook, our state superintendent, was there. And at the time, he was looking at the Illinois Learning Standards, which were developed in 1997, and thinking, now is the time to maybe take a look at what we've learned in education since 1997, how we can update the learning standards for today's job and college environment. And he sat down with a couple of the other chiefs from other states and said, hey, are you guys looking at this? Because it would be great to collaborate. Maybe we should have a meeting tomorrow. And 26 states showed up. And the next meeting, 35, and they were from all over the country. And the goal was really to work collaboratively, come up with the best thinking, get input from teachers, from community members, from higher ed, from business leaders, and work together. We know that students, student may start in 4th grade in Minnesota and end up at the end of 4th grade in Illinois. We want to make sure that there's some commonality on what they're learning so that they're not either 3 months behind or 3 months ahead. We want to share resources. And I think that it was such an exciting moment and really led to the adoption of the development of these Common Core standards, which I hope we'll talk more about. And I hope that you guys will, on our website, we have so much information about the Common Core. We also have the standards themselves, and I would encourage you guys to take a look at them, read through them. And again, looking forward to answering lots of questions, and thank you for inviting me.
Hi, my name is Erin Rosh, and I'm with a bunch of parents who run StopCommonCoreIllinois.org. It's a website. I have a child in the public schools, and last year I went to a parent conference with the teacher, and I asked the teacher, why are we not working on penmanship? Why are we not working on spelling? Why are we not doing cursive writing? And she said, oh, well, it's not a part of the core curriculum. And I said, well, why don't we want to learn spelling and how to write? That's something you would expect out of your public education. And she said, well, in 4th grade, they're gonna get on the computers and spell check will take care of that. So anyway, I decided, what is this core curriculum? And I started looking into it. I had not heard of Common Core until this point, and what I found was shocking and alarming. Common Core is just a small part of what I call the Common Core system. And we'll probably get into more detail when we start asking questions here later in this presentation. But what it is it's really a bunch of projects, initiatives that are all running with each other. The first is the standards, and we're starting with English and math. There's other new standards coming if anyone wants to ask about that with science and social studies. They're not called Common Core, but they're designed to work with it. The second thing is the data collection. We've always collected data here for No Child Left Behind, but it was from kindergarten through 12. With Common Core, we now are collecting from as young as 24 hours old, all the way to age 20. And you will have a file on your child that will be in that database. And although they will tell you that the federal government does not have access to that database, they do through the testing consortium. And that's part 3, the testing consortium. We're gonna have a whole new set of standardized tests. When you step back from the Common Core and kind of look at the concept, one of my biggest questions, first of all, is the concept. They say that you're college and career ready. By college and career ready, they mean community college. The math is really honed down to where they are looking more at widget stuff, meaning what makes a good employee, not what makes a good person prepared for life. This is all about career training for this 21st century career. That's a very different concept.
Aaron, I'm going to ask what is Common Core in a couple minutes here, but I'm going to introduce our panelists here and let Bruno introduce himself, and then I'll let you go on.
Okay.
Common Core. Okay.
Just so you know that I am a social science researcher, so I do have background in social science research, which is really what Common Core is all about. And like I said, I am a mother, and I did graduate from the University of Illinois in Chicago. Thanks.
Hi, I apologize for my tardiness, first of all. My name is Jessica Handy. I'm the Government Affairs Director at Stand for Children. We are an education advocacy group with a focus on improving education outcomes for all kids. We think no matter where you're born and what your zip code is, that you have the human right to have a high quality public education. So we work with parents who haven't typically been very engaged in a kids community and help them get involved and see how they can help support their kids and help support systemic reform to ensure that we have the best teachers in the classroom and that we have high quality school options for every kid. Probably more importantly, I'm the mom to Natasha. I live in Springfield, Illinois, so we hit some traffic coming up here, and that explains why I'm so late, but I thank you for having me and inviting me here today.
Thank you. My name is Bruno Barron. I'm the Senior Fellow for Education Issues at the Heartland Institute. It's a free market think tank out of Chicago, covering primarily state and local and some national issues. And if Erin is the example of the ground war on Common Core and talking about all the details and various things that she has learned about it, I'm going to be here as an opponent of Common Core, kind of giving you the 30,000 foot, 60,000 foot air war kind of idea. And I don't know if you like the metaphor, the war metaphor, but I think it's important to put this in the right perspective, because what's going on here is, if not a war, certainly a competing set of visions. And the Common Core, from my standpoint, where I'm going to come from on this, is the culmination. One hopes it's the last gasp, but it is the culmination of something that they have been trying to do in the United States of America since the founding of the NEA as an administrators group in the 1840s or 50s. And that is this ideology that says that we must centralize the education in the United States of America, and we must therefore have a centralized bureaucracy, a centralized goal, a centralized way for all of us to educate all of our children so that we are all good citizens. Some people may like that idea. They might go back to the Northwest Compact and look at that. But the fact is that this idea was borrowed not from the United States of America, not from our founding ideas or ideology or documents, but from the Prussians, who were very good at sitting in seats and looking at the chalkboard and listening to what they were told. So what I'm going to do over the period of this conversation, and as we discuss this, is I am going to present to you what I think is a better vision, a decentralized vision, a vision that allows teachers to practice their craft and parents to guide and work with their children in a much better, more efficient fashion than a top-down, centralized, one-size-fits-all system, which we have been moving toward since the 1840s, and I would suggest has increasingly been more expensive with ever-increasing levels of failure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to let Nikki Baser start with this question. In your professional opinion, what are we talking about here? What is Common Core?
Sure, thanks. So the Common Core are standards, okay? So what standards are they're what students are expected to know and be able to do. They're essentially goals and expectations for what knowledge and skills we want our students to have at the end of their schooling here in Illinois. They're not, and maybe I'll also say what they're not. They are not a curriculum, and that's important because you all live in communities where the teachers and the principals and the parents, they know what kind of curriculum they want to teach. We have local control in the state over education, and so the curriculums that local school districts develop, they develop through their community process. And that will still take place under the Common Core. We have the Illinois Learning Standards. These are similar insofar as they are a set of guideposts for what schools should be aiming for their students to reach. But how they get there is up to the local schools. The standards, and I would say, you know, the great thing about the Common Core is that they are very robust. They allow a lot of flexibility and decision-making on the part of the local school districts on how they want to get to where the Common Core is directing them to, is guiding them to go. You know, the Illinois Learning Standards were good, but what we're trying to do with the Common Core is to really put into place rigorous standards so that our kids are ready, and not just ready for community college or career, although those are absolutely noble paths to go down, but also higher education, four-year education and beyond, if that's the choice that they're making. The standards are not watered down. I was talking to some folks in the audience. They're not less rigorous. In fact, they're more rigorous. A lot of people describe some of our old standards as a mile wide and an inch deep. These are not only trying to teach kids concepts, but how to think about the concepts. I'll give you an example. With math, you know, you might teach a child a mnemonic device to remember a formula. But what if you add a variable into that formula? If you haven't taught that student how that mnemonic device came about, how to think about that problem, when they're faced with a more complex problem, they don't know how to approach it. The Common Core, the goal is to try to give the students the tools, not only for the procedures of math, but also the knowledge to understand how to approach problems. Likewise in English language arts, writing, reading, comprehension skills. Again, I would really encourage you all to look at them. We actually have a comparison on our website between the old learning standards and the Common Core, so you can take a look at how the changes take place. You know, my son's in kindergarten, so we're just starting, my oldest is in kindergarten, so we're just starting this process. But we already see sort of the excitement in the schools about the rigorousness and the robustness of these standards. So, again, I think what we have to remember is that this was a process by which huge numbers of folks had input and thought and really looked to work together to come up with standards for our schools. And Illinois folks had there were 10,000 comments from community members, from teachers, from educators, from higher ed, from business folks, that went into the Common Core. The State Board of Education, commented and worked with other states to come up with these. So, I think what we've got here is a set of standards that will allow our students to reach the goals that we in the state of Illinois want to see them reach. Shall I turn it over?
Yes.
I don't know which order we're going here, so.
You can just go on.
You'd like me to tell you what the Common Core standards are?
I want, in your professional opinion, I would like you to just explain what Common Core is for us.
Sure. So I want to step back just a second and talk about when No Child Left Behind first came about, and it was a step in the right direction, I guess. They're just saying, well, there should be some accountability. We've got to close achievement gaps. Let's have 100% of our kids eventually meet standards. And we'll put that on the states, and we won't define what those standards are or what assessments you'll use to measure them, but you states, you get your kids to 100% of kids meeting this. So it left a lot of flexibility for states, and really, it almost encouraged a race to the bottom, because, if 100% of kids have to meet these standards, or else you're facing No Child Left Behind sanctions, you've got an incentive to lowball your standards, and then to create an assessment that's pretty easy to meet standards. So parents might go along thinking, oh, my kid's meeting standards, my kid's gonna be fine. They get to college and don't realize they're gonna have to take 2 semesters of remedial math before they can even get into a credit-bearing course. It's not fair, it's not honest, they are absolutely not college-ready standards. I'm gonna push back on one thing Nikki said, which is that Illinois learning standards were good. The Fordham Institute, this is a conservative think tank out of Ohio. If you came to the previous summit that was held in, I don't know, it was about a month ago, right? And Mike Petrilli was there from the Fordham Institute. Well, I read this analysis after I heard him speak, and they read standards of the 50 states, and Illinois was among the lowest. We got a D in math and English standards for their clarity and rigor. Common Core standards are significantly better. These are raising standards for our kids, no doubt about it. And math Common Core standards, previously it used to be a mile wide and an inch deep, where you have this spiraling idea. You have your kids in first grade, and we got to do addition for 3 weeks, but I don't care if you don't get it. We got to move to subtraction and do that for 3 weeks, and now we have to move on to 3-dimensional shapes, and now we have to move on to patterns. And if you children don't get it, that is tough. You'll have to wait until next time we come around to it in this spiraling curriculum, and the question was never really called. Not knowing, or not facing the fact that if we want our kids to understand multiplication, we have to give them a strong foundation in addition first. And so Common Core looks at those stepping stones to what kids need to know to be able to have math fluency. Our old Illinois learning standards let kids have a calculator in 3rd grade, and Common Core standards say should not be having that in elementary school, because kids need to be math literate. They need to understand how numbers work. In English, Common Core standards are bringing us from an era where we would read and write about how we feel to an era where we're reading more informational text. In science class, we might read a biology journal article. We might, in history, read the Declaration of Independence. We might be exposed to different kinds of reading that kids can understand, analyze, write about in an analytical or persuasive way, moving away from just narrative writing. Because this is really what kids are going to be exposed to the rest of their life.
Same question, in my professional opinion, what is the Common Core? Is that,
Yeah, it's for.
Well, we've heard the proponents of Common Core describe it as a centralized way to align all standards, or some standards, or most standards, so that all the kids are learning the same thing. And I think most of us understand that however they try to align, whatever they try to align, the kids in the inner city of Chicago are not going to learn the same as the kids in the magnet school in Chicago, are not going to learn the same as the kids in Gray's Lake, are not going to learn the same as the kids in Lake Forest. And all the standards in the world are not going to correct for the socioeconomic issues and broad diversity, economic, ethnic diversity that you have in a nation of 52 to 54 million children. Common Core is a great concept if you're Finland. When you're all the same race, you're all the same religion, you're all the same, you're all north of the Arctic Circle, and you all think the same. Centralization doesn't work for the United States of America, and it's not going to. I would argue that a standard drives the curriculum. So when the proponents of Common Core say that all the curriculum is going to remain local, but the standards are rigorous and the standards are going to be driven from the top, that's the same as saying, McDonald's has a standard, and school districts are much more like a McDonald's franchise in locality than they are like a local school district. So you have to remember this. But when McDonald's says a quarter pounder has to be this kind of meat with this much fat and this much beef, that's a standard. And that drives everything about where they're going to buy the meat, how they're going to put the buns, how much ketchup they're going to squirt onto it, and everything else like that. So the idea that the curriculum will remain free and local and wonderful and driven by your teacher is mostly nonsense. And this is true, driven specifically from a experience out of Pennsylvania, where the law itself says that only 13% of the curriculum is able to be allowed to be locally driven, and everything else has to be driven by the curriculum organizations and the testing consortia and everything that are driving the standards. So you have to be very careful about whether or not these things are really rigorous. Is it rigorous not to teach a child to spell because they're going to be able to use spell check? I wouldn't call that a rigorous standard. So there's a whole range of things that you have to stop and think about, and what I want you to do as this conversation progresses is ask yourself whether a top-down, one-size-fits-all centralization it works best for your child, works best for your community, or whether there isn't a better way to do this. And I think that that's what we have to start the conversation, is the better way to do this.
So to me, I'm sorry, out of turn, I had already started talking about this. Common Core is really a bunch of programs. It's a system. They're all running in concert with each other. When they say that the standards are more rigorous, they are more rigorous in certain areas. They actually definitely are. But what's happened is they've dropped away a lot of what most of you probably learned in school. They don't think it's necessary anymore. And really it's the process about that that's bad. Because although they say, oh, we had public comment, these standards were approved, I think it was on June 1st. And they reviewed them on the 25th, and they were in effect a month later. A month is really not a long time to evaluate basically the fundamental transformation of schools. This is a big picture thing. They start a file on your kid in the P20 database. Now the federal government is loose in privacy laws and what's allowable to be collected. We don't know long-term what Illinois will decide to do as far as data collection. But what we do know is your kid is now a widget. The teacher logs into a computer. They're tracking, they're looking at graphs. Are there good things about that? Sure, of course there probably are good things about that. But again, it's the process here. Did you know that? Did your teacher tell you that? With the English language standards, they're going a lot to informational text. The person who wrote the standards for English language, the self-proclaimed writer of it, he said he wants children to only think within the four corners of the page. What that means is that if you're reading the Gettysburg Address, you don't talk about that as actually on a, literally lime-covered, horrible battlefield in the Civil War. You're just learning how to deep read, look at the words, the complexity of text, not the context of what it meant to our culture. As far as the math goes, they've peeled away, like I said, a lot of the more theoretical math. They're trying to create people who can go into the so-called 21st century job. Another thing about Common Core is really it is a corporate takeover of the schools. Most of the researchers, the panels, and the non-for-profits who are working on Common Core are Bill Gates funded. The Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation. I don't know if Bill Gates is an evil mastermind or the biggest hearted man in the world. What I know is he paid for it. The federal government says they're not involved, yet they did pay for the testing. They have contributed money into that. Why did Illinois take this? Because they got boatloads of stimulus funds And when you took that money, you had to say as a condition that you would expand your database from the preschool through till age 20, that you would take the standards and you would take the testing. So this was pushed on a very, very broke state, although I must say most of the people in Illinois and the educrats were very pro Common Core. They don't see it as being pushed on it. They were eager to have it. I guess my last comment is, what is Common Core to me? It's my phone ringing every single day, all day long. Teachers living in fear, calling me from the bathroom at their school. They're so upset their children are crying and throwing themselves on the floor in kindergarten because they're asked to do deep thinking in kindergarten. There's a lot of problems with this. I have parents calling me. Catholic schools and Lutheran schools are getting pressured into adopting this in Illinois. It's a very emotional issue that we really were blindsided by. So it was rolled out very poorly.
Well, as a follow-up to that, I'd like Nikki to respond to this. What's the process of how this is being implemented here in Illinois?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. I'm also happy to talk about how it was rolled out originally. But I do want to just respond to one thing that the first speaker, the gentleman from the Heartland Institute said. You know, I'm just not going to sit here and accept the fact that just because you live in inner city Chicago, you can't learn as well or the same way as someone who lives in Lake Forest, a kid in Lake Forest. Every kid in the state of Illinois has the right to a high quality, top education, and all of those kids have the ability to learn. And you know, yes, there are socioeconomic issues that plague our state that affect kids in rural districts, that affect kids in inner city districts, who affect kids in suburban districts. We have low-income students, we have kids in poverty in every one of our districts in the state of Illinois, and all of those kids can learn. And if we sit here and say that there's groups of kids that we can't even touch, we've given up, and in my mind, that's the worst thing we could possibly do for these kids. You know, in terms of how this happened, you know, it absolutely did not happen overnight or 2 days later. The process started in 2009. There were comment periods over the span of 2 years where the State Board of Education solicited, where the Common Core, the folks that were developing the Common Core solicited. 10,000 of your Illinois citizens responded to that those comment periods. The rulemaking, which put the Common Core into place, went in front of the General Assembly, their joint rulemaking. There's a process where when that happens, it goes through public comment at the State Board, it goes through public comment period following its introduction to the Joint Rulemaking Committee. Lots of ample time over the span of 3 years to really weigh in. And then the implementation began in 2010 when they were adopted, when these standards were adopted. And I will just sort of clarify for you, again, we have Illinois learning standards now. There is a central set of standards in Illinois that are the same thing. They are goalposts. And as Jessica said, there are a lot of problems with the Illinois learning standards. That's what we're trying to do at the State Board, is to address those issues. But it doesn't change the fact that there have always been learning standards in Illinois, and the Common Core is just a new version of that, but it still gives schools the same ability to change curriculums, to use curriculums, to adapt curriculums, to share curriculums. What they've always done in the state with the Illinois learning standards, they can do with the Common Core. So we see districts rolling this out, and you know, I'm sure that there is. I'm sure that change in schools is always difficult, and teachers have a lot thrown at them. Goodness knows, we put a lot on our teachers, and they perform admirably. I'm sure there are teachers who are concerned about this. I'm sure there are parents that are concerned. What we hear overwhelmingly from teachers is how positive they are about the Common Core curriculum. What we hear from the PTA, the Illinois PTA, is that they're hearing overwhelmingly positive things from their parents. We're hearing that across Illinois. Of course, every district is going to implement differently. Every district is going to have its challenges. Every district is going to have its triumphs. We at the State Board are committed to helping. We have lots of resources on our website. We have folks at our agency who can help, and we see really successful implementation of the Common Core as it's rolled out in schools and as schools are adopting. Always there's going to be bumps along the way, but I think that what we see is really good, exciting work on the Common Core happening in our schools.
If the rest of the panelists want to chime in on the implementation question, that's fine.
Go ahead first. I just have something to say, so go ahead, Jessica.
So, one thing I think we should be careful of, Erin's commenting about these teachers and parents and students who she's hearing from who are really upset by what she's attributing to be Common Core. And I would say, let's not throw our hands up and say, oh, Common Core is responsible for this. Let's actually get involved in with our local school boards that is determining curriculum, with our local PTOs, and talk about this, because there's no reason that Common Core would be to blame for a child throwing themselves on the floor crying because they don't get something. I mean, you still have, Common Core actually even gives more ability for autonomy and innovation to local districts, because Common Core is saying, here you go, these are the standards, here's what you're expected to reach. Now, you guys decide what to do. You guys determine your own curriculum. And it's opening up these doors to innovation across the country. Teachers are able to share their curriculum across state lines now. There's going to be so much opportunity. And at the same time, you know, there are things that are going to be billed as this is Common Core aligned that is totally not. And you as citizens, as community members, should be looking at that, look at your kids' materials, talk to your school board, and make sure that you like what's going on there. Because there's lots of room for local control in this. And if we say Common Core is to blame for all of it, I can't do anything, then we're really abdicating our responsibility as parents to get involved and to talk about that.
With the implementation, again, I just want to warn you that the PTA took a huge grant from Bill Gates, and they are producing what I call propaganda about the Common Core. I received it from my school. The Illinois Association of School Boards, if you look on my website right now, on their page for principal or for school board members, they have a guide about how to find key communicators in the community, like, for example, a member of this church, and then infiltrate and see what people are talking about over their backyard fence and control the message in the community. That's right there on their website. If you look at my website, you can see it. The implementation of Common Core is a propaganda war. It's funded by Bill Gates, and it sells it. Now, of course, when you're selling a product that you're going to make a lot of money off of course you're going to put out really great commercials. I will say that a lot of schools have done an excellent job training their teachers on Common Core, whether the teachers agree with it or not. I'm not blaming the Illinois School Board. They decided to sign on to Common Core, and they got what they signed on for. I also would say that, you know, yes, there are problems with the implementation, because a lot of what the standards demand in the lower grades are, according to child psychiatrists, inappropriate for a child. Their brain's just not at the point of having little staff meetings in kindergarten and working on artwork with consensus. Have you ever tried to have a kindergartner work with consensus where they all agree on what the little dog should look like? No. They are on the floor crying because they don't want peer review in kindergarten. That comes later in development. My child didn't want my review of their artwork in kindergarten because they'd be on the floor crying. So, you know, again, we have wonderful teachers in Illinois, and they really are doing the best they can. Like I said, my phone rings all day. I'm the Illinois Common Core counseling line. Apparently, my phone number gets passed around to parents and teachers. And, you know, I think that we all just need to know where this is coming from, and the publishers are making a lot of money. A lot of the books with the Common Core seal on the front are literally almost exactly the same book it was before Common Core. And a lot of publishers are putting out a lot of trash, actual pornography, and it all has a seal on the front that says Common Core. Now, of course, the developers of Common Core did not intend for pornography to be in the schools, but there's a lot of problems here, part of which is because Common Core was rushed along to get in line to take advantage of that stimulus money.
Let me just clarify something for all of you and for Nikki as well. When I commented on the socioeconomic differences in the United States, none of that was intended to give anyone the idea that it's okay that, you know, we're just going to have to write some people off. That's the exact opposite of my message. As a matter of fact, I think that it is centralization. It is the district system. It is the zip code system that has created the educational apartheid that has damaged the inner city kids so much, when there are far better ways to incentivize and produce education for these children. So far be it from me to talk about the soft bigotry of low expectations, which is what the existing system does, whether it intends to or not. What I'm rather doing is saying that this Common Core, it'll come around again. If it fails, if it doesn't work, it's going to come around as the Common Backward Smoke Bender, or Goals 2016, or Outcome-Based Core, or the Core Outcome-Based Curriculum. They'll name it something, because they've been trying to name it this, and they've been trying to do this for decades. So what you have to remember is that there is nothing really new or special here. This is another attempt, hopefully the last attempt, the last gasp of the centralization in the district-based system. What we need to have is completely, and I want to invite you to compare, because now we're comparing the Common Core to what? The Illinois standards? I think all of us agree that there were ways to improve standards, but there's also ways to water down standards and centralize standards that don't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you for just a moment to look at a different vision, and that is numerous testing systems, numerous curricula, numerous ways to get tested, that instead of 2 consortia funded by all the funding interests that want to do this, rather, instead of that, have 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 consortia, or companies, or private institutions, or Khan Academy. Has anybody seen Khan Academy? You can go on Khan Academy and it'll figure out exactly where you are and exactly where you can go instantaneously. Let there be 10,000 Khan Academies. And that is a system where the money follows the child to a vast new array of independent content providers. It'll be a far superior system than anything that could be imagined by a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., getting together with a bunch of bureaucrats in the 50 states, getting together with a bunch of people in 14,000 top-down, zip code-based, apartheid-oriented school districts to ram something down your throats and then say, oh, but you get to have 13% of the curriculum over here from your fine teachers.
All right, now I'm going to ask 2 more questions before we get to the audience questions. The first one should be a simple one. Has the Illinois legislature voted on adopting the Common Core standards, and if not, why not?
So the process in Illinois is what the state statute says, the school code says, is that the State Board of Education adopts learning standards for Illinois. And they do that through regulation. And so the way the rule-making process works with State Board is the State Board, which is made up of 9 members of the community in Illinois, get together and they vote to put forth a rulemaking. Then there's a period of public comment, then they adopt it, and it goes to the Joint Commission for Rulemaking, which is a bipartisan body made up of members of the General Assembly. And they then weigh in on the rules and adopt the rules. So the General Assembly doesn't vote on learning standards, but they vote on the rules to implement the standards. The standards themselves are designed by the State Board of Education.
Did you say the State Board has approved the standards so far, or they have not approved them?
No, they have. The Common Core was approved in 2010. It went to the General Assembly's Joint Rulemaking Committee, and they approved it in 2010 as well.
And did anybody else want to follow up on that? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, your state assembly member, they did not vote on this. Like I said, I sit all day long. I'm an unemployed mom. I get phone calls all day. People go in, they meet with their state rep. Their state rep really, literally knows nothing about Common Core except that they got a big check from the stimulus bill. That's pretty much all they know about it, because they didn't vote on it, because it's not a law, and it's not a law we can repeal. It's a bunch of, what it was that, and I won't go through the whole process, but it was a 2 or 3 step process where to qualify for Race to the Top funds and also the state stabilization funds out of the stimulus bill, which quite frankly, if Illinois didn't get that funding, one wonders how many schools would have closed. Basically, there were strings attached. And so the General Assembly, more or less, what they've told me personally was, well, here's these strings, we have to have this money, what do we need to do this? Now there's people in the state who are fans of Common Core. In fact, Illinois is a leader on a lot of this Common Core system programs. And I'm not gonna sit here and say every single thing about every standard and every initiative and everything is bad, because obviously it's not. There's a lot of really good people who are involved here. But the point is that we were not voted on it. Did any of you get a letter at home saying go make public comment on the Illinois Board of Education website? No, I don't know a soul who knew about that. And they really did get the final draft, and it was on the ground rolling in Illinois within a month. I read the notes from that school board meeting, the Illinois State School Board meeting. And they had spent a couple years putting everything in place to be able to take those stimulus funds. So that is true.
I just wanted to respond to a couple of the statements that were made, just to clarify some facts. The Common Core standards were implemented in Illinois in 2010. There were no federal dollars attached to the Common Core implementation. I'm going to say that again. There was no federal dollars attached to our implementation of the Common Core. It is true that Illinois did receive a Race to the Top grant in 2011, which was after the implementation of the Common Core. And yes, the federal government did, as part of their Race to the Top application, say, if you adopted the Common Core, we're going to look favorably on that. But it did not give you money to implement the Common Core. And so I want to be clear about this. This was a state-led initiative to develop learning standards, okay? There's a lot of other information being talked about here, are the longitudinal data system, testing. We can certainly talk about those, but what we're talking about here tonight, the focus of this, is a set of learning standards, rigorous learning standards, that are guideposts and goals for our local districts to reach in order to improve the educational outcomes of our children. You know, this is not a vast conspiracy to hide from you all what was in the standards. There were 10,000 comments on the standards. There were more comments when we went through the rulemaking. The members of the General Assembly, we at the State Board take our responsibility very seriously with the members of the General Assembly. Quarterly, we hold open phone calls with members of the General Assembly where all sorts of issues are discussed. Common Core in particular has been. This year alone, we had meetings in March, in April, in September. We've testified at budget hearings, at subject matter hearings on the Common Core, well before they were implemented, well after. We want people to weigh in on this. We want to hear from Illinois, and we do. We hear from citizens, from parents, from superintendents, from principals all the time on these issues. And we take that into account when we are formulating these really important pieces of our educational program here in Illinois. So I do want to be clear on the timeline here and the sort of what funds were actually involved. Thanks.
I'm going to touch on the Race to the Top issue as well, because I hear this a lot. This seems to keep coming up, and I think a lot of people somehow have this misconception that Race to the Top was offered to states exclusively for adopting Common Core standards, and that can't be further from the truth. In Illinois, our state superintendent in, 2007, 2008, was, talking to other state superintendents and like, why do we have this redundancy? Why are we all developing these different assessments? It doesn't make any sense. What do kids in Illinois need to know that's different from kids in Indiana, that's different from kids in Missouri? Jobs are mobile, and we live in a global economy, And it just makes sense for us to have standards that are college and career ready, and to have one assessment to measure them so we can see how we're doing and make sure that our kids are getting what they need to do to be ready for college and career. So when Race to the Top came around, it's not like Illinois didn't know that it was interested in raising its standards to a college and career ready level. We were there already. And Race to the Top was a federal competitive grant program that offered states this chance to compete to get this money. And it was out of 500 points total. There were 70 points that came from having high standards, college and career ready standards. And the rest of it were from things that I suspect most of you will like quite a bit, like having a charter-friendly environment. We lifted our cap on the number of charter schools that could operate in Illinois, which made us more competitive for Race to the Top. The biggest thing we did to make ourselves more competitive for Race to the Top was we linked teacher and principal evaluations to student growth. So we've seen these studies that show 0.4% of teachers are rated unsatisfactory, which basically means teachers weren't getting any feedback and no one was actually evaluating them. So we are in the process of implementing a rigorous new evaluation process that's going to enable teachers to get the feedback they need to grow and develop as professionals, and we're going to incorporate student growth in those evaluations for teachers and principals. All of this stuff was related to Race to the Top. And I was a legislative staffer at the time when all this was going on, and high standards was not like something attached to Race to the Top at the time. It was something we were on.
I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna let us move on real quick so I can ask one more question, unless you want to have one comment before I ask my question, before I let the audience ask their question.
My comments into the next question.
Well, I want to know what the Common Core standards are as compared to the former state standards then.
And this is a good time for me to incorporate my remarks. Somewhere in this rammed through without anybody knowing, and we all had hearings about this and we communicated with everybody. I think there's enough evidence on both sides to show that some kind of process was met, and there probably was some kind of hearing notice. But in the midst of all of this, we kind of have to think about it from this perspective. We remember a very notorious person in politics saying, to read what's in the bill, to find out what's in the bill, you're going to have to pass it. And that did happen with Common Core here. And this is starting to happen everywhere across the spectrum on all kinds of policies, is that more and more information and more issues that are in our lives are implemented through much more opacity and much less debate than we've had here. So I think it's important, and I'll go right back to a solid issue here. I think it is entirely fair for Dwight Kay's bill. I don't know the number you gave, I'll find out in just a second. But to do a pause button, hit the pause button on this and slow it down. The inertia is all there, and all of that is going to happen. So to get to the specific question, you're saying, how do the standards compare? To the best of my knowledge, and Aaron may have more information on this than I do, there are some states that had very poor standards, that they look great on tests, and then I'll give you a quick background. There's something called the National Assessment of Education Progress. It's called the NAEP test. It's not given to every student. It's not like the Illinois State Standards or the ISAT, but they call it the National Report Card. And what would happen with the NAEP test is you would see the states with very poor standards test poorly on the NAEP, but they did okay on their state standards. And then states like Massachusetts, that probably most people would agree had the highest and best standards prior to the Common Core, their kids would always test very closer to slightly above NAEP, which was, again, that's the National Report Card. And it has been shown that the Common Core test results, to the extent that we have very many of them, and we don't have very many of them yet, but to the extent that that they've been tested, that the Common Core standards do come closer to the NAEP. So those are the kinds of things that the proponents of Common Core are going to argue show that the standards are rigorous and college-ready and wonderful and covered with sweetness and light. The fact of the matter is, again, I'm going to come back to this same issue. There are better ways to test, and the idea that the job in Minnesota is the same as the job in Illinois, and therefore we need a standardized test on that, I think it's time to question that, because yes, We do need to know that kids can travel from one place to another, but a broad centralized test driven from the top down with a single set of standards that narrows the curriculum is not the best way to create an educated populace. It might be the best way to create a bunch of nice, really nice, good little Prussians who all know the same thing, but that whole strata of economy is changing. That the Industrial Revolution, which is what's driving all of this widgetized, everybody has to learn the same thing, that's already on the way out if you look at what's happening with jobs. And what we need is a standard system and a testing system that is much more organic and free-flowing than this idea that one size fits all can work for everybody.
Yes, I agree that our previous Illinois state standards were very, very low. These standards, like I said, they are more rigorous in the areas that this secretive committee decided should be boosted up because they fit the criteria of the so-called 21st century job. So it's not really a matter of them being more rigorous, less rigorous. It's a matter of what they focus on in the standards has changed. And sort of the philosophy has changed. Like I said, now in kindergarten, they start very early, making your student feel like the collective is what should be focused on. There's things that probably everyone in this room would agree on, and things that everyone in this room maybe wouldn't like. So, you know, we can sit and talk the standards, and every debate that I'm in, the person who is arguing for the standards keeps saying, come on guys, just look at the standards, you can read them. And I do encourage you to read them. But the fact is, this is a system. It's the fundamental transformation of your schools. You have to look at the standards and then look how it fits in to the database, the testing, the data collection, the social science research, the widgetizing, comparing this child who's, you know, black and in Chicago and in this socioeconomic strata to another. And I totally agree that every child in Illinois should get a great education, and every teacher should hold those children to account, and the teacher should be held to account. But as Bruno said over and over again, this really is No Child Left Behind on steroids. The reason they went to Common Core is because the states just kept lowering their standards because they were being held to performance metrics under No Child Left Behind. And Illinois', you know, standards had really good things about them, but they really were quite low. So, again, it's the centralization doesn't work. Common Core is just doubling down on No Child Left Behind. And I doubt there's anyone in this room who's really a fan of No Child Left Behind. It's really not that different, except now the states can't set their own standard. Everyone has to have the same. And the other thing that I'm going to mention is now that states have Common Core, the rollback, the fight back across the states is huge, because now that they've got the bill and they've read the bill, they're not so happy. You have Alabama, Alaska, Georgia, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Wisconsin, Florida, and then I guess you could probably throw Illinois in, who are having hearings, have legislation, or didn't do it to begin with. So the concept of every state being the same is probably not going to work out. And just my little statement, final statement is, if you look on my website, the application for Race to the Top is right there, signed by Governor Quinn and by Mr. Cook, who's our state superintendent. It says right there, of course the federal government is clever enough to not name Common Core in that document because by Constitution they're not allowed to force a curriculum or standards on the states. What it said is that you have to have college and career standards that meet our requirements. And you can read the whole application. It's right there on my website. It's right on the Illinois School Board website. And you can decide for yourself if they didn't get points in the full application process for having Common Core or not. And it also mentions the database and the testing, the three things that I mentioned. So you can decide for yourself. That's just sort of a mincing of words.
How are Common Core standards different than previous standards?
I
My
just
question?
want to compare the two, yeah.
Compare the two. I want to actually compare the application of the two, because you heard me talk about the Fordham Institute study that our old math and English standards got a D, the Common Core standards get an A- and a B+. And the data system that keeps coming up, I can't tell you why I'm so excited for this data system. Right now, when we're looking at No Child Left Behind, we're saying, this cohort of 11th graders got, 50% of them met and exceeded. And now the next cohort tests. We're looking at apples to oranges. It's really, you can see that this cohort of kids has done better or worse than the last one, but they're not the same kids, and it's not the same. It's not the same metric. With the other thing that this does is it encourages schools to really just look at, kids, are you right here? Are you at the benchmark? Did you meet standards? And kids that are a little below, they'll work with. Kids that are a little above, they'll work with, because really, you're being judged on whether you can cross that line. So schools have this incentive, and I'm not saying all of them do. Some there's just an incentive to ignore kids that are way below that level and kids that are way above that level, because you're not measuring growth. You're not able to measure growth. No Child Left Behind did not have a good system in place for doing that. And this data system that is held to extremely strict privacy standards, no student level data can ever be transmitted to the federal government. The only things they get are aggregated data files. But what's going to be great is that teachers are going to be able to see where a kid started and where a kid got to. You're going to be able to measure that growth and see the effect of an individual teacher on that child. We're going to be able to direct our state dollars to effective programs so that we can maximize student outcomes with the limited budget we have. I am so excited for this data system.
I'm not sure where to begin. All of this is so interesting to discuss. I'm not really sure where this idea of widgets and Prussians has come into the conversation, and I would, the Common Core standards are about teaching kids independent thinking, about complex independent thinking, about building strong content knowledge so that they can look at a problem, understand it, to respond to varying audiences and tasks. So if they're approaching a scientific paper, it's different than approaching a historical document. Definitely context for what that document means. Comprehending, but also critiquing, understanding where a viewpoint is coming from, and knowing how to critique as well as understand it. Using evidence to support their arguments, using technology thoughtfully. All of these things are part of the Common Core. And I did want to I want to respond because the issue of the House resolution has come up, and Representative Wheeler put some questions on the table about money and funding, which hasn't really come up in these questions, and I just wanted to address that briefly. The Common Core has been under implementation in Illinois since 2010. You have schools across Illinois who have put incredible amounts of time and energy and effort into implementing the Common Core. To simply halt the implementation, I'm not exactly sure then where you go. Do you go back to the old learning standards, which we all seem to agree were not rigorous, were not what we wanted to use for our students? Do you have no standards at all, so we're sort of all fumbling around in the dark on this? I think that it's concerning to me and to us at the state board and to districts who have really spent the time and energy implementing, that we would sort of just halt this in its tracks. And I wanted to address the money piece of this. There is no cost to the implementation of Common Core in the sense of every school district has money in their budget to put in new curriculums. You don't use the same books from 1997, from 2002. So the curriculums that you're adopting for the Common Core, of course, you're going to use your local dollars like you would when you update your curriculum materials. And so, schools have already invested that money and that energy and, are excited about the Common Core, and we would hope that we continue to work with the Common Core so that we can move this forward. Obviously, we respect the role of the General Assembly here and what the General Assembly wants to do, and if that's the way it moves, but we would hope that that you all would, look at our resources, read more, talk to the folks up here more, and weigh in on this debate, because I think you'll see some really exciting things going on at your schools with the Common Core.
All right, thank you. I'm going to open this up now to audience questions and answers. I'm going to let did you have a question, Mike? Okay, hold on. I'm going to let the panelists give about 1 minute responses if you can. I pushed the time a little bit because we started late, but we have to be done by 9, so 1 minute if you could. So I'll let the question in the back here first.
Well, I don't know all the specifics, and I'm certainly not an expert on Common Core, but I have lived through some history. And, you know, I look at 1976, Jimmy Carter formed the Department of Energy. The sole purpose was to make America more energy independent. They've been at it for 36 years with a budget of $68 billion. At what point do we say you failed? The Department of Education came on the scene in 1979. Since then, the cost of education has skyrocketed, and our education has gone down. We're now 16th in the world in our education. And we've always got people from the government implementing this and implementing that. But to me, it's like a traveling road show selling us medicine. Now you got just a different kind of tonic. And the only data mining that's going to come out of this is now we're going to be 16.2578 in the world. So my question is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. At what point, who can we blame now for the state of our education? And are you going to come back if Common Core fails and say you're sorry?
Whoever wants to respond to that first.
Well, I think I'm the bureaucrat from the government, so I'll give it a go, okay? I'm not exactly sure how to respond to your issues regarding the federal government, but obviously we are all a part of the education system here in Illinois. The state board plays a role, your local school board who you elect plays a role, your parents play a role, your teachers play a role. We all work together to try to improve education in Illinois. Do we have places to go to improve? Absolutely. Are we trying new reforms to try to make that happen? Absolutely. Will they all succeed? They will probably not all succeed, but that doesn't mean that we don't try to improve the state of education in Illinois working together. We spend countless hours at the state board working with parents groups, school board groups, principals, teachers, superintendents, parents, community members. We listen to comments, we sit down, we work on initiatives. That's the way we work. We never roll out an initiative that comes from on high without having talked to all of those stakeholders and folks, with our local representatives, with our state representatives. It's a collaborative effort. We're all to celebrate when we succeed. We certainly can share elements of the blame. We will certainly take blame when our programs don't work, and we will try to make them better. We have acknowledged that the learning standards are not where we want to be, and so we're pushing forward with research-based, with rigorous standards that we think are going to help the children of Illinois. Can I sit here and say 100% guarantee every school district, every child, it's going to work for them? No, I'm never going to do that to you. I'm not going to say it that way. But I think together we can try to make education better in Illinois, and if we stop trying to do that with new initiatives, we have already failed.
And I'll also say there are a lot of examples of success in public education, even though, as you said, there's been a lot of increased funding going to there. And I think what we've seen is that funding alone is not the answer to our education problems. So we can have examples where funding goes into a quality blind salary schedule, and the most experienced teachers with the master's degrees who are making more regardless of quality work in the wealthiest schools with the kids that are already doing fine. That is not a way to close the achievement gap. We need to do a better job of equitably distributing our teachers. We need to do a better job of helping support high quality public school choice in neighborhoods that don't have good options for kids. I mean, all of this comes into play, and to say it's a behemoth of an organization and government's huge and it's failing, I think we owe it to our kids to look deeper at that, look at examples of where it's working, and direct our resources to programs that are working, to options that are working for kids.
Under No Child Left Behind, every state had its own standards. So we had some kids who escaped this, like Massachusetts had very high good standards because they went back to classical education. I just want to remind you that George Washington was commanding an army when he was, like 19 years old. Children used to be fluent in 3 and 4 languages. when they were like 15 years old, homeschooled, and I love homeschoolers. Why are we not demanding more for our kids? It's because the educrats keep coming up with these reform movements that are paid for by like the Gates Foundation and these textbook publishers who all get to recycle and have all new materials put in the schools every 10 years, and we're paying for that. Our children used to get taught in little red schoolrooms, and you know what? They had a much better education. We've all looked at tests from like the 1890s or even 1910, before this progressive education movement. These children could hand calculate, compound interest with just a pen and paper. So why every child, every poor child in Chicago, every child in Peoria should be able to have local control so that they could at least be as ready for the world as children who used to leave the home at 15 years old, like my grandfather, and create a gigantic, huge, successful company, which he did all by himself. So I don't understand why we want this college and career ready for this illustrious 21st century job that no one even knows what it is.
Mike, I think I kind of forgot your question, but I think you asked, I'm from the government here, I'm here to help you, and how does that work? What I also did is I took out my smartphone, which is technology, and I used it to amass some evidence. And I haven't had time to look at all the different Google links that popped up on this smartphone, but clearly there is a cost to implementing a radical change. There's an article I've just thumbed through in Wisconsin about the difference in costs and tests and everything. And this leads me to remind all of you about a couple of facts and figures that go independent of whether or not Common Core is successful or somewhat successful, or whether the standards are slightly better. Since 1950 to today, we have had a 96% increase in students, almost doubling. And we have had a 702% increase in education administration. If you want to know where your money is going, if you want to know what generates the need for more money, the need for more costs, it is the constant, and I would argue completely unnecessary, re-engineering of education in a sphere where, quite frankly, the quadratic equation hasn't changed since they came up with it, since Newton worked on it, and 1 + 1, last time I checked, is still 2, no matter what the consensus is. And facts haven't changed, and teaching facts and all that stuff hasn't changed. But yet what has changed is a never-ending flow of funds into a never-ending engine of updating and changing and doing all of this stuff. And it's not for the children, because it hasn't helped the children. Test scores have been flat, spending has skyrocketed. So when we bring this into the context of Common Core, there's now going to be an army of Common Core consultants. And there's going to be an entire industry of people that have to come in and tell your teachers how to change what quite frankly, most teachers already know how to do, which is to teach. And it's never ending. There's going to be people that are telling you that every classroom has to have a 360-degree camera to measure children's facial expressions. And these are already on all of the lists of all things in classroom. It used to be a smart board, now it's 360-degree cameras. And here's the thing. There's a place for that. There's a place for the brick-and-mortar classroom. And there is a place for children to sit in desks and learn things. But again, ask yourself whether this vision, whether this closed bureaucracy that you have to get certified and get special degrees to get into, where it's all a bunch of musical chairs of never-ending increases in bureaucrats and consultants and technology, is really necessary to educate your children. And this is what I want you to start thinking about when you're starting to think about Common Core. Do we really need this level of one-size-fits-all top-down system, or is there a better way? And I think I have one.
All right, thank you. I was actually wondering what 3 times 4 was, but I saw your hand first, so I'll let you go here.
Going back to when I was in 5th grade, my dad was an accountant, and he would help me with arithmetic. And then all of a sudden, they came in with this new math program, and I was totally confused by it. It's supposed help you learn math more, but it didn't do anything for me. And it was so bad that my dad couldn't even help me with it. It was so radically different. And so I was lost for math after that. I really couldn't follow it. What this sounds like to me is a huge social experiment. And I'm wondering if there's any pilot program that has been done to actually measure any type of results from this type of conceptual teaching.
Erin may have more information on that. Let me just very quickly piggyback on the question that you asked. And I would ask every single person, pro-Common Core, anti-Common Core, to Google the words Project Follow-Through. And Project Follow-Through was a longitudinal study that began in the late 60s and went all the way through the early 80s, the late 70s, and then they compiled all the information through the early 80s. And if there were to be a Common Core, if there were to be a curriculum that we should impose on everybody, it should be a curriculum which most of the people in this room would call traditional education and not progressive. That drill and practice actually works, and that people who say drill and practice is bad and it doesn't teach context and all this other stuff are actually proven to be wrong by Project Follow-Through, which has not been refuted, has not been undermined. That study has not been yet. But that's not even my argument. The argument is, going directly to your question, to the best of my knowledge, the first test of this was just the first people who got to take the first test of Common Core. It has not been practiced in a state. They didn't take a state with bad standards like Illinois and try it in one state. They didn't try it in one district. This was, to the best of my knowledge, a very broad, instantaneous application, which leads me to this one thing. Whenever somebody talks about real reforms, where money should follow the child to a vast new array of education institutions, they always tell us, well, you can't experiment on our kids with these unproven things. But when the top-down bureaucracy, when the federal government and its 50 state boards and its 14,000 school districts all acting in concert like a large franchise does, drives a change all the way through the system, then it's not experimenting on our kids. Then it's rigorous and college-ready.
How many of you were told not to put all your eggs in the same basket? Probably everyone in this room. Common Core was not pilot tested. They argued, oh, well, you can't pilot test standards. I say, why not? We could have put this in one state, and then if it didn't work, only one state, the eggs would fall and break. But now, thankfully, a lot of states are pulling out, but if they would have gotten all 50 states, our entire country would be in one basket. What if that basket fell? What if the Common Core doesn't work? An entire generation of children would be ruined as far as their public education. And now we have the Lutheran and Catholic schools who in various statements say either they're afraid that they're going to be penalized if they don't take it, and some Catholic dioceses think that Common Core is beneficial for their students, but they're all afraid of the tests. Even the homeschoolers are afraid of the tests. What if you do a classical education at home and your child knows Greek, they know, they have a thorough classic education, they're a thinker, they aren't reading within the four corners of the page? What happens when they go to take their Common Core GED or their college entrance exam? What are these tests measuring? We don't even know yet. They come out next year in Illinois.
I think Bruno actually said it best a few comments ago, where when you look at NAEP scores, the National Report Card, and you see states that have standards closer to Common Core standards, you will see that they fare better on the National Report Card. It's because their standards are more closely aligned with what kids need to know when they graduate from high school, go into college or their career. And we've all pretty much agreed, I think, that the current Illinois learning standards are pretty crummy. So Common Core, at the worst, is significantly better than what we've got in place now.
And I just want to be clear that what we're talking about is not a revolution in the sense of suddenly 1 + 2 doesn't equal 3. You know, I'm going to read, I looked at the kindergarten standards. I have to admit, I was, you know, my son's in kindergarten, so I wanted to look at those the most. You know, here's a common standard Here's one of the math standards for kindergartners. Understanding addition is putting together and adding to, so using objects, fingers, drawings to understand that concept. This is a basic concept of math. It hasn't changed from when you were in school or when we had the one-room schoolhouses. But, and schools will differ in how they work that out. Some of your kindergartners might be using physical objects to group together to learn addition. Some might be using their bodies to do it. Some might be looking at numbers on a piece of paper if they're towards the end of the year. They may be approaching this in different ways with different curriculum, but these are rigorous standards that have research-based, and as Jessica said, they didn't come from nowhere. We looked at states where their standards were rigorous, where they were doing well on the National Report Card. We looked at education research. We looked at how other countries were performing and working. They weren't created from whole cloth. They were created from standards that other states and other countries have been using, that have been research-based, where people have been looking and seeing what the results are. And I think that that's important to note. And absolutely, our kids need foundational skills, 1 + 1. But, and while nothing has changed on that front, everything has changed, right? Our kids cannot succeed in higher education, in the job field, without access to technology and understanding of technology. It doesn't look like it did. Our world does not look like it did when there was one-room schoolhouses. And so, while we have to take what was good from those lessons, we also have to adapt and grow to what our society looks like now. You know, I'm not certain what Bruno is suggesting in terms of a radical new approach. Your school boards and your local community schools are accountable to you. You elect those folks, you work with your teachers every day. That is the system that we have in Illinois. And these Common Core standards are there to assist these districts to get to where they need to go. And that's, I think, the important fundamental here.
Sir, good.
There probably isn't anyone up on the panel that I haven't disagreed with and agreed with as far as several points, and I appreciate the presentation that all of you have given, and I think you have received a relatively good overview of the things that are going on, but I did have some specific things, and Bruno, I didn't pick up your last name?
Barron.
Farron?
F-R-E-N-D.
Okay. Farron? Barron. Old. And the first question for you is, you describe a particular system, and I'm just asking you, where has that been tested, and can you give another example of a large heterogeneous country that particular system has been successful, or at least tried in?
Yeah, it's first of all, the system that I propose, and I put it relatively generally, I say that we need to have a system where the money follows the child to a vast new array of independent education providers. This could be schools, tutors, learning organizations, libraries, whatever. And they should be independent. They should be independent of a top-down approach. And with some different variations, this has been tried in part or in whole in various different places. Obviously, one place that it's being tried right now is Wisconsin, because they have money following the child. They've had vouchers in Milwaukee. Vouchers have expanded everywhere else. Sweden, that well-known red state, full of arch conservatives and Tea Party nut jobs, that has gone voucher since the mid-90s. Obviously, there are some, if you're taking government money, there's some government strictures on what you can do. 900 schools, new schools opened within the first 5 years. So it's hardly a radical idea. Okay. And I would argue at the same time that if you take that moderate idea or radical idea, however you want to look at it, and if you compare it only to test scores and only to the things that have gone on since we've been working toward that system, the results are better and or the same for a lower cost. And, take it one step further, if you compare it with the 70 years of never-ending increases, centralization, bureaucratization, and expenses that we've seen in the existing model, the top-down model and compare it to a money follows the child system, it's very clear that the money follows the child system probably will be more successful in educating more children better.
Okay, in just response to that, so really you're advocating for a money following the child, and I don't really disagree, because I agree that if anything historically has happened in government, and the gentleman's already left, is we do a pretty poor job in implementing good ideas. And I think that's one of the things you need to recognize is be careful of the emotional words that have been used. Read the core curriculum. Decide for yourself. The resources are out there. And I really challenge you to do that. Be very careful in going in a shortcut to that. And Bruno, how with your children did you follow up with that ideal?
How what?
How with your children did you follow up with that? Did you do private schools and that kind of thing with your children?
I had one child, his mother decided he should go to, he went to 2 or 3 years of private school when he was young, and he graduated from Oak Park River Forest High School and joined the Marines.
Okay. And Aaron, your kids are in homeschool?
I'm pulling my son out of the Illinois schools, yes.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Mine pretty much goes along with what Aaron and this gentleman was saying, but I just wanted to make a few comments and then you can comment on it. I feel like, why is it that the further we get away from the 3 R's, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, the worse our children are doing? How many more children will be robbed of a solid base education? And what college career and readiness did we not have in the past? And as far as phonics, when they took phonics out of the schools, the children did not know how to read words anymore. They were told to memorize the words. Then now they're told to just sound it out, but they have no phonics ability, so they're spelling things ridiculously. As far as cursive, they can't read it. I know many people that cannot read it. I don't know why we have gotten away from the 3 R's. That's still a base education. That'll get you anywhere, even downtown. So I don't know why they keep trying to break what's fixed. And that frustrates me.
The schools have become an industry, and I encourage everyone here to get involved with their school board, because I'm not going to lie to you and say these standards say what books are used. They are not a curriculum. Your school board looks at the standards, and they try to find the best way to meet those standards. And every school does have the choice of picking different books. They have to teach the standards. They're not allowed to change the standards, and there's no known procedure to update or fix the standards. However, they are theoretically allowed 15% of their class time to teach non-standard materials, which I'm sure a lot of schools will. However, those won't be on the test. So I would push your school board and just be the fly in the ointment. Read every book that they're allowing the teachers to use. A lot of the materials now are these like share spots for teachers, which on the one hand is great, but on the other hand is allowing a flow of really flawed materials. We've probably seen the pornographic books. We've seen various worksheets that have, I'm not sure if it's philosophical errors, as I'll call it, or if it was really just a badly worded sentence, but you look at it and you're like, wow, this really misleads the children. So be all over your school board. As long as we're stuck with Common Core, in my opinion, there's a lot you can do on the local level to make your school fit your community as much as you can. You know, I don't want Common Core, but if we're stuck with it, fight like a warrior on your school board level to make it as suitable as you possibly can within the box that you've been put in.
And I'm going to push our minute to make sure we get as many questions as we can. So go ahead.
The Illinois schools and the Illinois learning, the Common Core standards, of course, still include reading and writing and arithmetic. I mean, those are the English language arts and math. These are English language arts and math standards. And they're all about those skills, those fundamental skills that kids need to know.
But they're done very poorly.
You know, I think that
You can see the results.
well, we're just rolling out the Common Core, and we're just implementing, and we definitely have seen the results before from the learning standards, and we know we need to move to a more rigorous set of standards. You know, I also would echo Erin. You know, when she said she was going to pull her kid out, there were some folks who said, "Oh, great, good for you." You know, to me, the responsibility here is if you believe that the public school systems need to be better in your community, then you work like hell to make them better in your community. You know, I'm on the State Board of Education, but I'm a parent who has kids in a local school district, and my son has been in kindergarten for a month and a half, and I have been to every single PTA meeting there is. We are asking the teacher what's going on. I've been to curriculum night, and I have talked to parents, and when we don't like what we see, we're at the school board meetings. We're talking to our principal. That's how change happens at the local level here, and that's what's so exciting about schools in Illinois.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add is with regard to cursive, because I've heard this one a lot too, and we've never had cursive in our learning standards. I mean, the Illinois learning standards didn't include cursive, Common Core doesn't include cursive. I mean, if a local district wants to teach a unit on cursive, go demand that they teach a unit on cursive. They still can do that.
That's ridiculous. It's unacceptable.
How are they going to do the Declaration of Independence?
That's what I'm saying. They got too far away from basic education. Even the
You know, you have to look online because these standards are so not acceptable to parents that if you look online, I have my child in school right now all day, and then he goes home to Aaron's school for like 2 hours to teach him all the things that the schools no longer teach.
Erin, what's your website?
My card's on the table and back, stopcommoncoreillinois.org, all footnoted factual information, so.
So I have like about 500 questions, but I'll just stick with one. But my first comment is, I just want to say, only 2% of children actually move out of state, yearly. So with that being said, there's schools for them. So I believe that all kids, should be individuals, so that Common Core isn't actually something that, they should be as individual as themselves. With that being said, though, anyways, I actually want to direct my comment to Ms. Hanley. Sorry. You said something about data mining not being directed by the federal, or they're not getting the information, the federal government not having their information from the data mining. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm listening to you so intently.
You said that they were going to have their information from the data mining.
Right. So the data system that the state board has developed, you guys can see every field that is available in this data system. I've heard that they're going to collect the kid's religion and the parent's occupation and the parent's income. There are no fields anywhere in the data system for that.
Yeah.
But if your child's school is asking that information, I'm telling you it is not recorded in the longitudinal data system.
I just want to know where you got that information from, because they're going to collect over 400 different points of data for that, and they actually built a huge center, a data mining center in Utah. So why did they build this huge center if they're not going to collect all that information for the federal government?
And why do they ask if you have a gun in your house on doctors' information?
None of that is recorded in the P20 longitudinal data system. If an individual district asks that, ask the district. There is nothing state mandated or federal mandated about collecting that information.
If anybody wants to respond on the federal data, we'll do that.
Okay. And I was just say, no student level identifiable information ever gets transmitted to the federal government. And let me.
Can you guarantee that?
Absolutely.
You're
So,
guaranteeing that.
of course. So the Illinois longitudinal data system collects data. Your school districts collect data now, and they transmit it to the state. They've always done that, and they have state reporting so that your students' information is in. If you want to look at what the data elements are that we collect, it's all online. And it's a long website in terms of what the data elements is, but I can give it to you, and you can take a look at what data elements that we collect. The data that we transmit to the federal government is aggregate data. Aggregate is one of these words that I do not understand as a lawyer because I am not a numbers person. But what that means is it's not individual student information. It's never individual student information. It's statistics as to what groups of students are doing without any identifiers as to the student's personal information. There's no personal information that is transmitted to the federal government. And I will say, we have a very strict student records statute in Illinois, and there's an equally strict one that is a federal law. And we, the state board, take our responsibility extremely seriously. You know, one of my roles as general counsel is to make sure that the data that your school districts collect, that they transmit to us, never is transmitted to people that it shouldn't be transmitted to. My belief in the privacy of student information is absolute. We collect it because we are
Do I get to know who you're going to transmit it to before you transmit it to them?
to the federal government.
Or to whoever? Are you going to let me know before you give any of my child's information to whoever you're giving it to?
The data that we collect
Yeah.
is required by, we are required to collect by state statute. So if you have concern about something that the school district or the state is collecting, you should go to your local representative if that's an issue that you're concerned about. All of the data elements that we collect, as I said, are online. It's very clear. You can see exactly what we are collecting and what we transmit to the federal government. The fields, not the actual data, I'm sorry, not the data of the actual kids, but the fields, what information, the categories of information that we collect, okay, are very clear to anybody. And we absolutely, and you can see what data that we transmit to the federal government. All of that is public information. We put all of that information on our website. If you want it from us, you can ask us for it. Absolutely, absolutely. The website happens to be, if you want to see what data elements, what fields we collect, it's isby.net, and then it's /SIS, /XLS, /data_elements _all tabs. And I apologize for that because it's a very long website, but if you just Google, if you go to the SIS, the Student Information System part of our website, you will find all that information.
Could you give that again?
Absolutely. Just what I would go is just to isby.net /SIS. That is our student information system, and from there you can get all of the information you need to know about what data your school districts are collecting and what they're transmitting to the State Board of Education.
I'm going to have to move on to another question now. So.
Sure.
I came in here tonight with an open mind. I have been researching Common Core online, reading everything that I possibly can in my lunch hour and my spare time. And I wanted to see what this was going to be about. I can't tell you how disgusted I'm feeling right now. I am sick to death of the schools teaching to the test. My kids come home and say, we don't have creative writing anymore because the state doesn't test for it. We only teach to the test. This, to me, is going to make it 100 times worse. I just came from a meeting, a 2-hour meeting with a superintendent of a very large school district in this area. I mentioned Common Core, and this superintendent went, really? It's disheartening to hear that we're having this shoved down our throats. My meeting with the superintendent was because of the poor education that's going on in our schools. Yeah. But I want to know, my main question here is, do you really believe that this is good for our kids? And the other part is, you said it's not going to cost us anything, yet you keep shoving things down the throats of the school districts, RTI, all the special ed. You do it, we're not paying you. So I want to know where you think this money is going to come from to implement all of this stuff.
Let me see if I can pull the question out here. I don't think that we're shoving anything down the throats of Illinois citizens. There have been, all of this information and all of this work was done by the development of the Common Core curriculum standards, and the curriculums that your teachers are implementing was done by teachers, by principals, by business leaders, by administrators, by educators in various fields. I mean, that's the truth, is that these Common Core standards were developed collaboratively. We at the state board take our responsibilities to our stakeholders very seriously, and we meet with all of them before we roll out initiatives. There are initiatives that we have adapted what our original thinking was, because parents groups have come to us and said, we want to do something different. Principals have said, look, this is not going to work in our sets of schools for this reason. And we have worked collaboratively. I mean, Jessica's one of our stakeholder groups. I think she to attest to the fact that when we sit down with our stakeholders, we take that very seriously. You know, the testing, I think, is a different issue here, and is a complex and I think a very troubling issue. Obviously, as you know, the federal government through NCLB requires a certain level of testing that is beyond the state control, and that is a concern to us. And we are looking for ways to provide flexibility to our schools even within that system, but some of that is outside of our hands. In terms of the cost, we are very aware of that. We're very aware of the state of our district. This year, we went to the amount of time and energy we spent with the General Assembly. The governor came out and said he wanted to cut $300 million from the education budget. We spent countless hours talking to our members of our General Assembly at budget hearings, talking to the community, saying, come out, we have got to increase the funding for education. And we got that budget raised. And you know, we absolutely understand the straits that districts are in. We live it every day, we see it every day. Our kids are in these districts, we're talking to these superintendents on the phone. We understand what you guys are going through, and we would ask you to give that message to your local representatives and senators. Increase the funding for education in Illinois that is going to the local districts.
That's the point. Where's the money come from?
Well, it goes to the local district.
So
These are
Where's the money come from? It comes from our pockets.
right. No, it's not. It goes from your pockets back to your schools, and that is the point, which is we need to prioritize education funding in Illinois.
The highest tax, property tax in this country.
I'd love to respond quickly to this teaching to the test question that you raised, because I agree with you. It's a serious concern. It costs $30 per test for a Common Core test, which is exactly the same as our previous
Well, I'm going to have
assessment.
the panelists respond to this.
But teaching to the test is a problem, and it's a problem now, where we have standards that are not very clear and not very rigorous, and the ISAT assessment, which, I mean, I go to these teacher evaluation system meetings where, you know, it's us and unions and management, people that don't necessarily agree on anything, but we can all disagree that the ISAT is absolutely horrible, and it's a really crummy tool to, you know, our kids they have standards that aren't very good, and an assessment that's also not very good, and if teachers teach to that, it's not getting kids the education they deserve. So having a higher quality test that emphasizes higher order thinking skills, reading something, understanding something, analyzing something, multi-step processes, this is the kind of thing that it's not about teaching to a test, it's about teaching kids how to think critically.
Just one sentence to answer the question about if this is funded. If you look in the school code, and it's also on my website, it's very ominous, because in the school code there's a section called unfunded mandates. And there's a process that, in theory, although my state rep laughed when I brought it up, in theory, school districts can go through a process to complain about an unfunded mandate and have adjustments made. But one of the most ominous things about the school code is the very last line says that the one unfunded mandate that cannot be negotiated is Common Core. So it is not funded, and what's really strange about it is that all the schools have to buy computers, and I've been told by my state rep that one of the reasons that Dwight Kay has introduced this proposed legislation is he's very concerned that especially some of our rural schools are really behind in putting the technology in, because the Common Core tests are meant to be computer-only tests, although I've been told Illinois already knows that a lot of schools are going to have to do pencil and paper because they just don't have the computers yet.
Go ahead.
I'm going to work really hard to be brief here, so throw something at me if I'm not. Couple of different things. Clearly, there's funding issues with such an aggressive change. On top of that, and I've seen a couple stories online on this, there are a lot of districts that are already using Common Core as an excuse to say, to become Common Core compliant, we have to spend X and Y. This goes a little bit outside of the Common Core debate, but you can't disconnect it. You can't untether spending from the never-ending implementation of new processes. I guarantee you that if this system continues the way it is, unchecked, 5 years from now, we are going to have another debate on another program called Common Something or Other, and it'll be the same debate. I think it's time, and we have a state rep in the room, and I'm sure she's going to agree with me on this, that if you walked into Springfield and actually suggested that we could implement Common Core for no cost, if we dramatically cut the salaries and benefits, or quite frankly, fired or let go a good chunk of the unnecessary people, or if these people are so necessary, then they can be the ones to help implement Common Core. But one thing you are never going to hear, and I think this is very wrong, is you can never, apparently as a politician, advocate for the freezing and or cutting and or reallocation of education dollars, because the bureaucracy, I call it the government education complex, never, ever can do with less money. It always needs more. And if it doesn't need it for Common Core, it's going to need it for something else. And it's time to say, you've had 50 years of dramatic, above inflation spending increases, the massive amount of which has gone into staffing and benefits for that staff, that it's time to say, you want to implement Common Core, cut something else, and freeze the spending.
I want to do, I can get one more question.
We really have got to get the facts right here. Education funding in Illinois has decreased for the last decade. It is going down and down and down, and what you have in reality are districts cutting music, art, extracurriculars, sports programs.
They can cut car allowances, they can cut superintendent benefits.
And they have, I didn't even know that, and I thought that was, I'm just going to try to finish here up. I think it is our responsibility as citizens of Illinois to find out why we are ranked behind every other state in how much money the state contributes. And it contributes to the inequalities of our education system because we're heavily reliant on local dollars, and we know as a fact that our local dollars differ from place to place. And so what we need to see, we can throw out all sorts of words about an educational funding, machine. What we're talking about is the majority of funding in education goes to teachers. Okay, it goes to the teachers that are in your classrooms that you want to pay for. And what we need is not to have our districts cutting music, cutting art, cutting sports programs that your kids benefit from, and you see it. You see it when they're in them, and you see the problems when they are no longer in it. And it's not fair that a school in Lake Forest has, computer labs and sports programs and art programs, and the school in the next suburb that has lower property taxes doesn't have those programs. And I think that we need to think about that.
All right, got to ask you.
I think the biggest nightmare in lives right now, Obamacare. That was this kind of selling, and then look what's happened to our country. It's going bankrupt over Obamacare.
Well, I'm just kind of reflecting about what other people are saying about basic education and stuff. When I was young and in grade school, they decided to get rid of phonics. And I'm a poor speller, and I don't read all that well either. And I was just wondering, could our students actually pass a test that was given in the 1950s? And I don't really think they can. And so I'm wondering, if something worked, why didn't we stick with it? And then I wanted to ask Jessica, you made a comment about parents getting involved in stuff. I have done that in the past when we actually did go to public school, and I was allowed to read to the kids and stuff in the lower grades and stuff. But since then, I've also tried to be in certain committees and stuff when they're looking at curriculum and stuff. But those committees are hand-picked, and they are hand-picked by superintendents most likely, or somebody that has a bias to who they pick. So as far as curriculum and getting involved and stuff, that's really great. But what do you do when those superintendents handpick who they want to say, okay, this is the curriculum we really want? And also, you know, the parents, I have to say this, and I don't mean this a cut on teachers, but a lot of times they're made to feel that they're not as educated in this area enough to be able to make this choice about curriculum. And somehow we've got to be more open that maybe the parents really do know stuff about how their kid can best be educated. Thank you, Jessica. And by the way, don't feel that because the crowd is here a little bit, you're going to be on the internet, I'm sure, so your audience is going to be, you know, thousandfold.
So my trip from Springfield was worth it? Is that what you're telling me? No, I think it was worth it for being here. I think we should have more of these conversations because, you know, if people are confused what Common Core is, this is the best way we can come together and talk about what it is and have these conversations. I think it's a great thing. Common Core does get us back to phonics in our early grades. Definitely, this is probably a pro Common Core point on that. And we totally support parent engagement. If it's not working, if your superintendent is not allowing you to get engaged, I would say there are school board elections, and those people are accountable to you.
Right, I mean, there's just been, we've had parents arrested by school boards. I've been kicked out of meetings. A lot of people in here have been kicked out of meetings. There's a lot of name calling. Arnie Duncan's calling people like me tinfoil hat crazies. Last week he said we're people who are silly and political motivated. This has nothing to do with politics. I have a 9-year-old, darn it, and I'm going to do what it takes, including giving up my career in homeschooling and pulling my kid out of school, because I don't agree with this. I don't appreciate any of that, and we need to tell these educrats, these are our schools, and we're taking them back.
I'm gonna let you guys do a closing, but I'm gonna do one more question here, and then I'll give you all a chance to do a closing, okay?
Just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know there was a sacrifice for many and appreciate all the comments. I went through school in the 50s and early 60s. We just had good old meat and potatoes, 3 R's, and we made it into college and we made it into the business world. Today, kids are graduating and they can't make it in the business world. They can't make it in anywhere. So somewhere the ball is being dropped. But if you had a car that was broken down, you would not think of bringing it to a mechanic that has a fleet of cars in his front drive that don't run. The government has a long history of being broken. Nothing it does well that I can see. It seems to run everything into bankruptcy. Bureaucracy becomes bloated and runs us into financial bankruptcy and corruption. So much money is spent in the school system for these high-paid bureaucrats who sit in offices who have very little to do with education. It's all about fundraising and politics. But bottom line is, and I'm kind of a Common Core person, I get to the core of the issue. The core of the issue is we don't trust government anymore. We did in the 50s, but we've grown up now. And when any government program comes out, we look askance at it. We get concerned about it, and especially when it's being ramrodded. And as one of you shared, that when you try to voice opposition, you could be arrested. We saw YouTubes recently of a father being arrested and threatened because he disagrees. So that doesn't sit well with the American public. We're still home of the brave and land of the free. We want to be able to speak our piece and be heard. And you say, go into schools and voice your opinion, they're not well received. The way to fix the school system is to let it run out of money, just like anything else. Go to a voucher system. Why are the private schools and homeschoolers the highest academic children? Why do they produce that?
I think this is just my opinion, it has nothing to do with Common Core, but just in one sentence. The one really great thing about Common Core, and I think actually my opponents here will agree, is this, for whatever reason, has really touched off parents and other community people, grandparents, and they're really starting to get involved in the schools and think about education in general and what's going on. So even though there's a lot of people like me who are going to have to sacrifice my career now, which is fine for my child, and a lot of people are making big sacrifices to give their child the education they need outside of the public system, and unfortunately the Catholic and Lutheran systems. Even though we're making this sacrifice, we should be excited because, you know, we're asleep at the wheel, and now we're wide awake. And we should be excited that ideas like Bruno's or this gentleman or anyone in this room may come out flying like the phoenix out of the ashes of Common Core. So I don't want people to feel depressed or defeated or angry. Being angry at your school board is not going to help. Going in and yelling and pumping your fists doesn't work. Because quite frankly, most of the school superintendents I've talked to, they're not happy about all these mandates that they're getting. And it's not just Common Core. Illinois has, I don't even know how many. My state rep, Deb Conroy, told me that they had to put a committee together just to find out what unfunded mandates schools have because they lost track. They don't even really know anymore. I mean, it's just a big stinking mess, and I hope we can all count on all of you to be a part of the solution to this, because we just need to solve this problem, and I think that it can be done. So this is, in some ways, you know, when things get kind of really dark, there's always blue skies ahead, and we just have to keep our eyes on the blue skies and make them come.
The parents that can afford to send their kids to a private school, the parents that can afford to homeschool their kid, I think it's great. I think it's great for parents to be that involved in their child's education. And I would say what's most unfortunate is the number of children whose parents aren't involved in their education. Parents who don't know how to get involved in their kids' education, parents who had a really bad experience themselves in public schools and don't go back and aren't able to go and support their child there for whatever reason. And all of us benefit by having a public school system that helps those children. I think it's our responsibility, and to let the public school system go broke because some people can afford to homeschool their children or put their kids in a private school is a dangerous suggestion, because every child needs to have a high quality public education, and we all benefit from getting that high quality public education to those children.
Okay.
Teaching a child to put a prophylactic on a cucumber is not something I think the school should be doing with sex education.
I'm going to let you incorporate whatever you want to say into your closings. We can all do a closing now. It is a little after 9. I pushed it a little bit. So.
My two mommies, my two
This is I'm just going to jump right into my closing here, and I think I think what we need to do is we need to understand that the Common Core as a centralized testing system is an idea that many people, many of them goodwill, quite frankly, think is a good idea. And my entire argument, and so this is why I saved it kind of for closing, but I've kind of given you a little bit of a glimpse of where I'm coming from. There's a place for centralized testing. There's a place for people to take a test to measure how well they did. The mistake is the idea that this system should be imposed on 90-95% of all the children, and quite frankly, even all the children, since many private schools are now feeling the need to go to Common Core aligned. We need to transition away from that system. We need to move to a system that is much more organic, that tests many more things, much more depth of many kinds of curriculum, much more efficiently. And this is not something that can be done by two giant consortia under some kind of federal contract. So what I ask you to do is to envision and advocate for transitioning away from this system. It is true that we rely too much on property taxes. That is because we rely too much on a failed zip code-based education. And what we need to do is we need to go to many more education providers that are independent, and we need to have the parents have the money. Not the districts have the money, not the superintendents have the money, not the system having the money, but we need to have the parents have the money so that they can choose, do they want band, do they want this, do they want that. It is the district system that creates the war of all against all. Lake Forest has band, Lake Bluff doesn't. Lake Forest has band, North Chicago doesn't. This is nonsense. There are parents who are going to want their kids to get a good education. There are some parents who are going to want their kids to do sports. There are some kids that... So I'm asking you, and I realize this is radical, I'm asking you to question the entire system so that you can begin the process of communicating a way to transition away from it. Because whether you hate the Common Core or whether you like the Common Core, if you keep the system, Common Core is going to be all you'll get, and it will narrow the curriculum, and it will create a Swiss cheese kind of one-size-fits-all student and a one-size-fits-all system. So I'm asking all of you to get involved in the process, not so you can get rid of Common Core only to have it come back 10 years later or 5 years later, but to get rid of the system. It's been taking, going back to the funding issue, I'm sure there's a district here or a district there that might have had less funding. Funding for education has increased dramatically across this country and in Illinois. And the portion of how much of it comes from the state and some of it coming from property tax dollars isn't the issue. The issue is the United States of America spends more for public education than any country in the world and gets generally very, very mediocre results for it. And that has to change. And to change that, you have to change the system. And to change it, you transition away from it and go to a system where the money follows the child to a vast new array of education providers and a vast new array of testing companies.
I just want to, again, just say that, society's changing. A lot of our institutions, including education, healthcare, just generally a lot of our traditional values are really kind of breaking down right now. I think people feel very worn down by that. Really exciting things are happening. I think that Common Core holds us back from those really exciting choices that kids can have. So don't lose hope. Stay involved. Talk to your neighbors. They don't even know about the Common Core and what's happening. They fundamentally transformed our schools while we were asleep. And we need to get involved, and we need to push back and create schools that teach thinking individuals, not widgets who are going to get a 21st century job. I think society is so fluid right now across the world. Parts of the world are on fire. How on earth do a bunch of educrats with Bill Gates' money even know what the 21st century is going to be like for these kids? How do we even know if going to college is a goal that parents can do? I mean, $2 and $3 million to send your kid to college? My kid's not going to college. I'm a very low-income person. I'm moving into my parents' house so that I can homeschool as a grown person with a husband. This is where this has pushed my family. I'm moving home. And I'm I'm an older person with a family. This is where it's pushed me. This is something that we all need to push back on. We need to be warriors for the kids, your grandkids and your kids. We can work this out. We're Americans. We can work this out. Take your schools back. There's children depending on you, grandmas and grandpas, whose parents are working 2 and 3 jobs. You might have to fight for your whole community. There's kids in Chicago that are depending on us all the way out here to push back. So please do not lose hope.
I've got to say this. So the Sweden voucher programs that are so great that we should all look up to, that we aspire to, some of us might aspire to be like, all of those kids take a standardized test, because parents having information about how well their school is doing is vital to choice. We have to have that transparency. Sweden does that, and it's an integral part of their voucher system. And I'm going to say Common Core standards are great, but they're definitely not everything. I mean, there's so much that goes into this. Setting a college-ready standard is one step in the right direction. We've got to have a whole host of things in place so we can improve schools for kids. One of the things that we are looking at is school-level spending. The state tracks where money goes from the state level to the district level, and then once the money gets to the district, what's happening to it? Is it being used effectively? Is it going into a quality blind salary schedule that is looking at at how well teachers are doing, at taking on roles, at mentoring other teachers. There's so much we can do with the education dollars we have to use them more effectively and to make the most difference for kids with them. Having the best teachers, having great leaders, there's just a whole host of things that go into having a high-quality public education system. Common Core is definitely one step in the right direction. There's lots more. Parental engagement is obviously huge, and you guys are all here, so I think that's great.
You know, I want to make a couple of points. The first is Erin referred to me as her opponent, and I would absolutely say that's not the case. I don't view any of the folks up here as opponents or proponents. We are all working hard, very hard to think about education in the state of Illinois. You know, I think there's a long conversation about voucher programs and the pros and cons that I'm not going to keep you here past 9 o'clock on. But what I will say is this, you know, there are huge problems to be fixed here, but I don't want to take our attention away from the fact that there are really, really wonderful things going on in schools in Illinois, and our teachers are working extremely hard, our principals, and yeah, there are certainly the exceptions to the rule and the people that are overpaid, but for the most part what we see is folks in education working extremely hard, long hours, not a lot of pay, and trying to do their best to educate children in the state of Illinois. And you know, there's so much success going on, and I want to highlight that. You know, Illinois has a lot to be very proud of. And as Jessica said, you know, the Common Core is one tool in the toolbox to get us further along to produce those educational outcomes for our children that we want to see. Not to make them widgets in some rat race, but to embrace their individuality, to work with their communities, to make our communities better. You know, business leaders like the Common Core, community leaders like the Common Core. Why? Because they want to see these kids get out of our school system and succeed and give back to the state of Illinois, give back to the community. So I just want to leave on a positive note. There's so much good stuff going on in Illinois. We have great folks involved. You guys came out on Tuesday night. You listened to us drone on for hours here about the Common Core. We appreciate your time. And if you need anything from the State Board of Education, we are available. Our Common Core website, I really hope, I know there were materials from different perspectives tonight on the table, but I would ask that you look at our website, our Common Core materials, to get some information too. Send us questions. Come to the state board meetings. We'd love to hear from you. You will never get arrested or kicked out of a state board meeting, I promise you. We have them all over the state. We'd love to hear from folks, and you know, please come and talk to us, email us, and we will continue to engage in this great conversation about education in Illinois. Thank you for your time.
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of our panelists for coming out tonight. Can I give them a big round of applause? Thank you all for coming. Thank everybody out there for coming, and a very special thanks to Representative Wheeler for coming out and spending her evening with us, sharing her insight. Again, any questions? They might stick around for a few minutes, they may not, I don't know, we're going to go back to Springfield.
Stick around.
But again, thanks for coming.